I just want to make sure you look. Okay, I do have on a top. Because I hate when it happens when you're like filming and the way that you're filming, it does not look like you have a top on, but I promise you, like I do. I have a top on, okay? I promise I have a top on. Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. So today I am here to talk a little bit about what I've read in the past week. I am trying so desperately to keep up with these weekly reading logs because it just saves me when it comes down to the amount of content that I'm consuming on a weekly basis. Now here's the thing. I will make sure I link the last one in the card symbol above, but I also want to continue to make a note of April is 30 and 30 for me, so I have been primarily reading manga. And so this is becoming now a situation where these wrap-ups for this month are going to be slightly on the, I guess, smaller side. But I will say that I actually left out a title when I did my wrap-up last week. So I'm going to cover that one first, and then we're going to get into what I read this week. I am not going to discuss anything about the manga that I've been reading because you can check that out on my other channel, and I'm doing weekly vlogs for 30 and 30, so you can, you know, if you're very, very interested in that, you can check that stuff out. So the title that I actually ended up leaving off last week was Killjoy by Holly Jackson. This is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder 0.5, which is kind of like a novella. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This is for fans of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. This is not just for anybody to randomly pick up. Actually, I would highly recommend that if you have not read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, I do not recommend picking this one up first because it inevitably is going to either one, confuse you or spoil some elements of the first one. What I did like about this is that it focuses on Piper and her friends doing kind of this gathering where it's a murder mystery party and they get together, and all it is, because it's short, I don't even think it's over 100 pages. I'm about to check right now. I really don't think it's over 100. Yeah, it's 119 pages. All it is essentially is showing readers why Piper got so interested in choosing the case that she chose for her senior project. It just shows you how she kind of works, like the kind of stages that she goes through in her head whenever she's potentially solving a case, and it just introduces you to her quirks about her that people love. And other than that, really, there's nothing to really add about it. It is not really much that I can say without really diving into its connection to the first book, which I don't want to do because if you haven't read it, I really just don't want to spoil it for you. But I can say, like I said before, do not read this without having read at least the first book in the series. And this is definitely one that's for diehard fans of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Like I said, primarily manga, but I have been reading, you know, a couple things here and there. This past week, I'm on track for 30 and 30. At the time that I'm filming this video, I am definitely on track, on par to finish my 30 volumes of manga for 30 and 30. But I ended up reading 2 other books, and that's pretty much it. That's all I have to cover. The first one is going to be Love is a Revolution by Renee Watson. I may or may not get the opportunity to, you know, spend a little bit of time with Renee Watson coming up soon. So there's that. But I decided to read Love is a Revolution. It is her YA contemporary romance, sort of, kind of, that was, I can't remember exactly when it was released, but I had heard some very conflicting thoughts and opinions about Love is a Revolution because of how the narrative kind of works. This book is not going to be for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and say that straight up off the top. This is not going to be for everyone, especially for adults who consume young adult. And this is where I always come into this issue with adults consuming an adult books, not because you shouldn't read that, because I read middle grade and children's all the time, but without the proper lens of understanding that you are not the target audience, it's going to read a little different for you as an adult, which it should read for you differently as an adult because you are not the target audience. But this focuses on a young girl by the name of Nala Robertson, who is she's fun, she's plus size, she has Jamaican heritage, which for me was a plus. This is a plus size black teenage girl who's confident in her body, which I'm glad that right off the jump, that's what I needed to see. But she's, you know, she has a cousin, sister, friend, so they're cousins, but they're like sisters because they live together, and then they're close friends. Her cousin works or volunteers for this nonprofit that's very much like youth activism, you know, teens very involved in like appreciating Harlem. And she kind of tags along, but she's not a part of the group until she attends one session and she sees this guy and she's like, oh my gosh, like it's very much so an Insta attraction, which now, because I read so much more romance than I have in the past, like the Insta love thing doesn't always bother me. I think it's depending upon how it's executed, but this is definitely an Insta, I would say an Insta attraction, like not Insta love, Insta infatuation, because this is a teenager. And she goes through the process of essentially like lying about everything about herself to make this guy like her. I mean, everything from what, you know, whether she's a vegetarian, whether she eats meat, lying about where, you know, she does, you know, these community work that she doesn't really do. And she just is trying to give herself these features that she thinks he will like and he will love. Of course, this is not going to go well for her whatsoever. It's not going to work out. You know, it's not going to work out. I think the issue that a lot of adults who are reading this book take with it is that it's frustrating seeing a young teen change herself for a guy. But here's the thing. While I was frustrated reading that too, I was like, geez, like, and then just seeing her kind of lie over and over again, I was like, holy shit. Like, stop lying. Stop lying. Just tell the truth. And she had so many opportunities to tell the truth and she just keeps it going. I was frustrated, but I also recognize that this is something that I think a lot of teenagers are going to be able to relate to. I think that all of us at some point in our lives have either done or said something to fit in, or because we want it to fit in. It is human nature to do stuff like that. And while I do think that she's doing this on a grander scale, which is, you know, it's a little bit more off the cuff than what the average person would do, I think it's very realistic, and it really does speak to teenagers who have ever felt the need to change themselves to fit in or make themselves more likable or make themselves fit in with a certain group of people. And I like that the conflict is someone who is passionate about their community but is even more passionate about their family, and is not like, I have to be activism 24/7. And I appreciated that, because I think that there's this push for the generation of like Gen Z, the younger end, and those who are older now. Like it's a huge push for them. Be the change you want to see. You gotta be an activist. And we see all these books coming out that, you know, are not saying they're a bad thing because they're educating kids about activism and activists. But I think that we also forget sometimes to tell kids, like, and teenagers, it's okay just to be a kid or a teen. Like, you don't have to be activist 24/7. It's exhausting and it leads to burnout. And so you have Nala, who is this like, I just want to stay home and watch a movie. That doesn't mean that I don't care about my community. It doesn't mean that I don't engage in any activism. I just don't feel like it needs to be a part of my life all the time, every single day. Everything that I do has to be related back to activism. And I respected that, because there's a balance that needs to be found, and you see that with Nala. I also appreciate the fact that Nala grows, y'all. Like, it's not like she does this and, you know, she gets away with it and that she doesn't learn anything about herself, because she does. And she's still growing at the end of the book. And so I kind of had to give her some grace for what she did, and understand and respect the fact that I'm an adult. I am not lying to anyone about who I am at this point. You either like me, baby, or you don't. And if you don't, that's between you and your feeling. It ain't got shit to do with me at that point. But I'm also in my 30s. And in your 30s, you really just stop caring because you're just kind of set. But a 16-year-old version of me, child, please. I could respect that. If I was thinking, when I read this and I was thinking about like, Ashley, when you were 16, like what were you doing? And I was like, oh, it's a good point. 16, 17 years old. Yeah, yeah, you know, you're learning so much about yourself. You're going through a whole identity crisis, I think, in some ways. You know, this is the time, especially with Nala, like trying to figure out, like, do I want to go to college? With like, what's next for me? That's a huge transition period for a lot of teens. I won't say every teen, because some teens they glide through, but for a lot of teens, it's not an easy transition period. And so seeing this behavior, as wild as it may have been, and as like off the cuff as it may have been, I was like, there are teens who are going to read this book and they're going to be like, damn, like I feel really seen by this. And so I gave it 4 stars. It was a quick and an easy listen, and I rather enjoyed it. And the last thing, actually, the last thing that I ended up reading this past week was a domestic thriller. I don't know why I've been in the mood. I have another one sitting on the couch over there. I don't know. I genuinely, I don't know where that mood came from. I ended up reading Dirty Laundry by Disha Bose. And this is clearly I like domestic thrillers. It was a 3.5 star rating for me. I clearly like, or I'm entertained. I'll put it as that. I'm entertained by domestic thrillers that have like rich housewives who are messy. The execution doesn't always land perfectly for me, but I think the initial setup and concept and idea of it is like, oh yeah, this is messy as shit. So this book focuses on a group of, and they're not all housewives, but they're all women who live in this village. 3 main players in this one, because I had to think about that. I'm like, girl, it's 4 people. It's 3 people. So I mean, there's more people involved, but it's mainly told from the perspective of these 3 people. So you have Kara, whose name looks like it's spelled Sierra, but on the audiobook it kept calling her Kira. They called her Kira. But if I would have read this book, I would have thought that girl's name was Sierra, but it's Kira. So it's a small Irish village. Kira is kind of like the Instagram, social media famous like mom that gives out all of this advice, and everybody like goes to her for everything. And she has this close friend that just moved from Calcutta, and they're like this. Well, Kira doesn't get along with another mom that lives in the village. Lauren and Kira just don't have good energy. They don't have good vibes, but things seem to go extremely left when Mishti, who is the wife that moved from Calcutta, when she ends up forming a relationship with Laura, Kira starts, she starts losing it a little bit, and of course Kira ends up dead. So the book is written where we flash back to all of the events that lead up to Kira's death. When I tell y'all this book was messy, I'm talking about people sleeping with other people's husbands messy. And I'm just thinking like, yo, what? And see, the difficult thing about this one is Kira's not a likable character. And she continues to be a character that you're not going to like up until the last page of this book. Like, you don't like her at all. And so it's kind of hard to even feel any type of empathy or sympathy for how things went down when you're like, well, she kind of low-key brought this shit on herself. But I wonder sometimes if that's supposed to like say something about you as a reader, where you're just kind of like, well, you kind of read what you sow type of situation. And like, it does get kind of like cold-blooded towards the end of the book. Of course, I'm not going to tell you what happens because I'm not going to spoil it. But I will say that I was very shocked by some pieces and parts, although the way that the twist was executed, let me put it this way. I figured that it was the person who did it. I was like, it makes sense. I called it. But then like the author does these weird things where it's almost an attempt to distract you from coming to that conclusion, but it's kind of like you already know the conclusion. So you see all of these other moving parts that trying to like discourage you from coming to that conclusion, which ends up leading to a very like multi-process like reveal of like how many people were involved or how many people weren't involved. Like, it just seemed like a lot because the solution actually to it was pretty easy. And so to make that solution not so easy, you just start throwing things in to throw people off the trail, which I don't like. Like, either write a banging ass twist or leave it, leave it as is. But throwing in random tidbits to throw people off the scent, it was just kind of like, what is the likelihood that any of this truly like would have happened? And I'm kind of tiptoeing because when you see it kind of play out, you're kind of like, like this, like, I was kind of like, what the world is going on? But it still ended up being a situation where I was like, okay, well, I was still right when it was all said and done, but we had this huge chunk of the story, not huge chunk, we had this piece of the story when we were building up to that final reveal where you were clearly trying to throw me off from the hints that I got early on. I don't know. This one's hard to explain. I thought the story was interesting. It was messy. I'm always here for a good messy situation, but it wasn't, once again, this is why I'm like, I like thrillers, but I don't like thrillers at the same time, because it's kind of like, either I guess it or I'm underwhelmed by the twist that comes at the end. Like, I haven't found one yet in the past year or so where I'm like, oh, at least adult, where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just mind-blowing, it's amazing. But I don't know. It was 3.5. It was solid. I randomly had put it on hold. I didn't know anything about the book. I literally just like, I put it on hold and I was like, I guess I'm gonna check it out and read it. And it came through and I literally listened to it in a couple of days and I was like, okay, well, that was okay. That was, it was entertaining while I was, getting stuff done at work. In terms of what I'm currently reading, I'm still reading a lot as always because, and I don't want to repeat everything that I read that I was talking about last week. So I'm still, like I said, I'm still in the process of reading for the 30 and 30. But another book that it's two things that I'm currently reading. And one of them I can't tell you anything about, which sucks. And you probably won't know anything about that whole situation for a while. But I am reading two things currently. I'm going back and forth between the two, trying to balance time. Because it's like, damn, like I'm reading stuff that I can't really say anything about. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I want to read stuff that I can actually sit down and talk about at the same time. So the one thing I can't talk about is I'm reading Remind Me to Hate You Later by Lizzie Mason. I put this as one of my anticipated releases for the month of April. I think this came out this month, or it's March or April, one of the two. I think it's March actually. I think it's March, either March or April, one of the two. This is a very, very hard book. I did not know that this book was going to be this hard. It is about a best friend trying to stop her now deceased best friend's mother from writing a tell-all book about her experience having a child who has committed suicide and how that's impacted her as a mother. And what's very strange about this is that, so her mother is kind of like one of those mommy influencers. This is like a big kind of like, I don't want to say this is like a shot at those family influencers or mommy influencers, but it does a little bit, because it's really discussing like not parents sometimes not understanding, especially those who are involved in the family and mommy influencer side of things, not understanding how much of an impact that can eventually lead on your kids, especially when they are made open to the general public for criticism and stuff like that. And so, as a mommy influencer, she was really open about everything about her child, like disgustingly open. It was horrendous how open she was about things. And I think this story is going to come full circle to what she thought she was doing in terms of what her intentions were, and really wasn't reality, because she wasn't as checked in as a parent as she should have been. But her daughter suffered majorly from it. And she had begged her mom, like, please stop posting about me, and her mom just wouldn't do it. Her mom just kept posting about her. She entered a severe depression and she ends up committing suicide. This is all in the description. It's not a spoiler. And so when the idea of her mother writing a book after her death comes out, her best friend is kind of like, hell no, like, you're not about to do this. Like, Jules wants you to stop writing about her, and you just would not do it. You won't stop writing about her. And if it's the last thing I do, like, in honor of her death, like, you're not going to do this. This is a very complex and layered book. I did not know that you spend the first part of the book actually in Jules' perspective. And you're in Jules' head up until the point that she commits suicide. I do have to point that out because I did not know that going into the book, and it hits differently. Because I thought everything was going to be from the best friend's perspective after, even if, you know, she interacted with Jules, I thought maybe like it, you know, everything still would be from her perspective. But to be in the head of the person who ends up committing suicide and then have the narrative shift as the best friend is getting the call that Jules commits suicide is kind of like, oh, it's an emotional roller coaster. This has kind of made me choke up a couple of times because it's dealing heavily with processing grief and coping with that grief and coping with the loss and the guilt that some people feel after a loved one does commit suicide. And so I do not recommend this one lightly. I'm not saying I don't recommend it, but if you're not in the right headspace for this, I would be cautious. I don't do this often because I love people to engage with tough topics, but this one is, for me, is even difficult for me to make it through this one. So I do want to give that out. I do want to put that out there. In terms of me like reading other stuff, y'all, like, I really am just focusing on that and the other book, because the other book that I'm reading right now that I'm not going to talk about is 500 or 600 pages. So that in itself, maybe I'm stretching it. Maybe it's 400, 500 pages. I think it's in between 400, 500 pages. I think I'm stretching it a little bit, but still. So working in between those two while also doing 30 and 30 is going to be a lot. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at there. Of course, there's other things that I'm currently reading. There'll be more things that I make my way through this upcoming week, although this upcoming week is going to be pretty busy for me at work, so I don't know how much I'm going to get read. But yeah, those are the 3 things that I had to talk about today. Some currently reading stuff. Let me know in the comments down below what y'all are currently reading and what you finished in this past week, and I'll be back with another video soon.